Hello all, and thank you for joining our session today. What we wanted to do was a live Q&A on staying safe at home from a cyber perspective. We've had a lot of questions over the last few weeks, obviously with people going from home and working from home, and in all honesty, we found that there's quite a lot going on that that can be done to help keep you secure. So what we've got today is another live event. There's a Q&A at the top right hand side of your screen. If you just click that and put questions in there, there's a few of us on this call from Seriun's perspective. Laura, our marketing manager, will be looking after the questions and we'll try and answer them as we go along or towards the end. But the format of today is we've taken the questions you've submitted already, put them into the presentation, and then we're going to go and answer them through them, and hopefully there's some you get some value from that. On the call today, we've got myself, Mark Edwards, who's the operations director, and then we've also got Richard Lee as well, who's our technical director.
Hello.
Who actually, it's his birthday today. He's
very much, Mark.
You're welcome. He's 38 or nearly 40, as we like to say, but he's celebrating his birthday and working from home, and I'm going to hopefully give you some good advice.
But not as old as you, Mark.
That is very true, and thanks for reminding me as usual. So what we're here to talk about is cybersecurity. It's more important now because people are using systems that aren't really managed by the corporate networks, using networks which are home networks, which aren't managed as well as they could be. And we really want to kind of highlight that. There's some statistics on the screen at the moment of what the actual real cost of cybersecurity is. There's a huge amount of it anywhere going around in terms of phishing, breaches to networks, and just general trying to get your money, for want of a better term. We've done a lot of sessions on these, and we're a cybersecurity accreditation body in terms of cyber essentials. But fundamentally, it's now more than ever important, because you're distributed across and wide and staying home and staying safe. But ultimately, cybercrime seems to have taken about a 40% uplift over the last few weeks because they can see vulnerabilities in home usage. So just some stats to put this into perspective before we go on to the Q&A. 91% of attacks begin with email phishing, which some of the questions submitted were how to spot those, which we're going to cover. 95% of phishing breaches are down to human error, and we hate to admit that. We provide a lot of technology which can help protect you against these things, and we'll cover some of that off. But ultimately, it comes down to the person sat in front of the chair, clicking the mouse, and unfortunately clicking the wrong button sometimes. 5.4 million SMBs are usually attacked per annum, which is not a nice state to be in. And hopefully some of the things we show you today will keep not keep 5.4 million down, but hopefully keep the people on this call down in that stat as well. And whaling is such a boom industry, which is whaling is basically trying to find the person who holds the keys to the most money in your business, and trying to get them to unlock it unwittingly, for certain techniques to open up the door to basically get your bank account. And it's even worse now because those people are distributed far and wide. And the one thing that actually we're noticing from our business is while you can be productive working from home, one thing that you lose is that ability just to pop your head up above the desk and go, oh, can you just have a look at this for me, and show that reassurance of something you're looking at to make sure that you're not doing something silly. And that has gone now because you're all sat independently at home. And cybercrime accounted for 30% of all crime in 18 to 19. And and this puts it all in perspective, really. Fundamentally, 92% of the world's currency is now digital, which is why they're trying to take it, to be honest. And that's has a huge impact on what happens day to day, because people just want to get hold of that cash and try and do it in any way it means possible. Hopefully what we're going to show you today will help go through and kind of give you an idea of where you can stop that. The format we've got for today is we've basically put some questions together from you guys who've submitted them. Please submit some more through the Q&A on the right hand side if you want. And then hopefully we'll be able to give you the answers for what you're after. So the first question is, what remedies are available if money is extracted from your bank account? So I'm going to hand over to Richard, who can answer that for you.
Yeah, so this one, if you've ended up in this situation, it's not good. The first thing to do is just call the banks. So the banks have got procedures in place around how to deal with cybercrime, but a lot of it is once the money has left the account, it's proving who had the problem. And we've done it for a few customers in the past, but it's forensic analysis of where the breach was and understanding who clicked the wrong link, proving it back to the bank, and asking the bank to release the funds back to you. The answer is don't do it in the first place. So it's training, policies and procedures. So your staff will never take bank details via an email. They'll always telephone back on the registered number for that business. They will reconfirm any bank transfers on the phone, that type of thing, to avoid it in the first place.
Yeah, it's really just about checking before you do things as well. The next question is, how do I spot a phishing email? That came from a few people actually, and it's a really good question. It's the same problem whether you're inside the business or you're outside the business, to be honest. So the same techniques apply, but hopefully what we're going to show you now is a few things that will hopefully help you spot those as they come in to your inbox. Phishing emails are all about trying to convince you that where they've come from is fundamentally a legit place, a legitimate source. And ultimately, they're trying to get you to click a link. What they're really trying to do is get you to click that link so that when you go and put your username and password into it, whatever it may be, so we've got an example here on the screen of Apple Pay. When you go to that and you put those that password in, it's trying to get you to basically supply those in that manner so that they will basically then log in as you somewhere else to basically try and take your money. So what you've got to try and do is spot them as they come around. Usually, and here we're putting on the screen some tips and tricks to spot them. Office 365, which we'll come to later, does offer some protection for this, and there are third-party solutions for it. But ultimately, this is the one thing that actually staff and everyone has to be critical and look at themselves about, because it is the one thing that really they can stop themselves by just deleting the email. So what you find is that it usually tries to give you a sense of urgency. It's always going to try and imitate a brand. So this one's an Apple one, and the next slide we've got one from a different one. It's always looking to make it look like it's coming from someone you already know. What usually happens is your username and password for some other website, LinkedIn or whatever, has been breached and stolen 2, 3, 4 years ago. So they know you're a user for that business. They'll then follow that up with an email down the line like they're saying, right, dear Apple user, can you tell me what's going on? I would like you to click the link to basically fill in your details because we've got a problem. So look for things that are impersonal. So why does it say dear Apple user? It should say your name if it's coming to you. Grammatical errors as well. If you roll over the link, so you can see on here, I'll just put my mouse on the screen for you. Hopefully you can see that. You can see if you roll over the link, it actually doesn't go to Apple at all. And all Outlook does that all the time. If you roll your mouse over it, you find that basically it'll show you where it's going to actually point to. And if that doesn't say Apple, then it's going somewhere different. And that's a really useful thing to know. And it can include things like attachments which look dubious and you're not expecting. What we've got is a Seriun phishing white paper, which will be added to the Q&A and sent out to you via email afterwards, which shows you all these things to check in phishing emails. And I must stress the one thing that's really relevant to checking what is a phishing email and what isn't a phishing email is fundamentally, if it looks dubious and you weren't expecting it and it's asking you to put information in, it's probably not legit at all. And that's always the first thing to check. The next, we've got another slide with some more things to show you as well. So this is an example from Dropbox, which basically is trying to get me to put reset my password. The first thing to look at is, like we said, where does the email come from? So if you look in the from box, that says Dropbox support, but actually after the email, it says Dropbox at emailnotice.me. That's not Dropbox. So you can tell straight away if that's sincere or not. If it doesn't say after the @ sign, anything before the @ sign can be faked really easily. Anything after the @ sign really is the legitimate domain it's come from. And if it doesn't say dropbox.com or something which you trust, then that is the first red herring to explain that it's not a legitimate email at all. Then you look at the link, like we said, you run your mouse over the link. And when you run your mouse over the link, it'll tell you where it's trying to get you to go to. So this reset password option here is trying to go to email.link.emailnotice.me. It's not Dropbox that it's trying to get me to go to, and that's a bad thing. If you get an email asking you to reset your password or put some details in it, and actually you think to yourself, well, maybe that is actually right, I have been to that service recently and I am concerned about that. What you can do is open up a browser independently, go to www.dropbox.com or whatever the website is trying to get you to go to, and put in your details and reset it through that method. Never click the links in an email, because that is ultimately what they're trying to get you to do fundamentally. And then also what you find is some of these links are hidden and they have underscores in them as well. So at the bottom where it says happy Dropboxing, again, not something Dropbox will probably say. These companies spend a significant amount of money on marketing firms to make their emails look legitimate, well typed, good grammar, and also try and hook you in. So again, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And the links themselves, you don't seem right. And when you run your mouse over them, they'll show something else completely, and it's not what you're looking for, to be honest. Hopefully that answered your questions on phishing, but what we'll do is we'll send the white paper out afterwards.
Okay, so another question came about remembering passwords. It's a bit of a challenge, this, because it's much easier when you're on a browser. Just tell it to remember all the passwords that you've got, and then you have to type them again. The challenge with that is if somebody has control of your PC, so somebody can install some malware on the PC and actually take control over it, they can then access all of your internet banking, Apple accounts, Dropbox accounts, whatever it may be. So ideally, you would use some sort of password manager, something like LastPass or something like that. That would then store your passwords, but require another factor of authentication to get into that password set, rather than just allowing the browser to remember all the passwords. So ideally don't, and ideally use something like LastPass. So passwords are very difficult because naturally, it's very difficult to remember a lot of different passwords, and naturally you'll end up using the same password or a combination of the same password for a lot of different sites. Ideally, don't do that. Ideally, use, again, some sort of password management system like LastPass that will generate long random passwords that are difficult you can't ever type them in. It's also important to ensure those passwords change frequently, so that a password is only valid for a certain length of time. So if somebody does have that password, maybe it's only valid for a month, 2 months, so the window of attack for that password is a lot less than it might otherwise be. Strong passwords, long passwords, are also much more difficult to brute force. So there are standard passwords. There's lots and lots of them, sort of, the welcomes, the dogs, those kind of things that everybody used and still uses for websites. The challenge is that they're on large password lists, that somebody who's attacking a website, if he knows your login details, will just try that password set until eventually they get in. So having a strong, complex password makes a lot of difference to the security of a site.
Yeah, we can't recommend that heavily enough, to be honest. And it does relate on, and there were really good questions from people who submitted them, and it relates to the next question actually. So what there were a couple of questions about two-factor authentication that have come up. Now, a lot of our customers already have that enabled, but some still haven't, to be honest. And we were always trying to promote it and push it. Two-factor authentication is the ability to have a second device which checks who you are. It's very common these days for banking. It's been around for a while, that. So when you log into your online banking, you'll have two-factor authentication. What it fundamentally does is stop the man-in-the-middle attack, which is becoming so prevalent these days, where what happens is someone will phish a person in the business to try and get their Office 365 details, for example. That person will unwittingly share their Office 365 details, username and password. The man in the middle is somebody who's then going to log in as that person into the website for 365 and set up rules and set up things to redirect emails as they come in and out of the business, and pretend to be the person in the organisation to suppliers or customers to redirect money. And unfortunately, it's quite successful. What two-factor does is basically stop that in its tracks. So the question which came in is, what is two-factor authentication and why is it important? Fundamentally, Microsoft released an article last year which said if you have two-factor authentication turned on your Office 365, which is free of charge, by the way, there's every license includes it, it will stop 99.9% of man-in-the-middle attacks, because ultimately what it is a second way of confirming who you are. So you've got your password, which you type into the website, and when you type into the website, it's going to then contact you in a different manner. That can either be by a fingerprint on your phone or a code on your phone, which is text to you, or an app you can use on it. Or actually, it can ring a desk phone or your landline and give you a code to type in. And why that matters is when somebody has your password because you've shared it or it was easy to guess, it will text you and say someone's trying to log in from a device that I don't recognise, and you'll look at your phone and go, that doesn't make sense because I've not logged in. And that's a red flag straight away to say somebody's got my password, I need to change it. They can't log in, you know it's been breached, and it will stop it out the door. It's an unbelievably good solution to do, and it's the one thing we would recommend to do out the door as fast as possible for everybody who has it. As I said, it stops 99% of shared password issues because ultimately it's going to text you something you have. So the rule of thumb with two-factor authentication is the first check is there's something you know, which is your password, and then the second check is something you have, which is your phone or your desk phone or an app on a device, which the other person in whatever country or whatever location never has. So that's why it stops so much. Other things that you can do on top of two-factor authentication, which this one doesn't cost any money, is you can actually stop access to emails from the Office 365 portal. So if some people in your organisation just use Outlook and nothing but Outlook to get access to their emails, or Outlook and emails on their phone, to be fair, you can stop people accessing the Office 365 portal, which is www.office365.com. And that stops somebody logging into their emails from an external resource out the door, so they can't even breach it through there if the password is guessed or shared. And again, that's going to stop that man-in-the-middle attack straight away. And also you can do geofencing. There's a little bit of cost associated with this, but if you find that most of your users actually live in the UK and work in the UK, or actually even closer, work in Blackburn or Burnley or the Northwest, then you can geofence it a bit further down there that people outside of those geographical locations can't actually log in as well. So while these things are the same within a business as with working from home, now's a good time to set it up, because we've got a lot of people who, unfortunately have a bit more time on their hands, but we can enable two-factor authentication on people's setups and go through that process. There's no cost to any of this at all, and it just makes you infinitely more secure. So relating back to the question of how important is two-factor authentication, we would say it is massively critical and probably top of the list of things that people should be doing to protect their Office 365 data, which is more than just email. It's your OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams if you use that as well.
I think the other thing, Mark, to kind of think about with this is people have a natural resistance to it, because they go, oh God, I've got to have another thing. It's just more hassle. I don't want my users to have a mobile phone. It's not that intrusive. So a lot of people think that every time they do something on 365, it's going to ask them for a two-factor authentication. It doesn't. So with Outlook, it's a one-time thing. So initially you put your app password that's generated. It's not your normal password. It's a randomly generated sequence of characters into Outlook. And until you move machine, Outlook will never ask you again. If you frequently use the same PC for your access to the Office 365 portal, that will only ask you maybe once every 30 days to re-authenticate with the authenticator app, depending on your settings. The same with mobile phone apps. It may only ask you 30, 60, 90 days. It's when a new connection is made from another unknown device. So the guy in Nigeria who's trying to access your 365 account to be a man-in-the-middle attack, he's coming from a new browser. He's in a new country, so he will get straight away the 365 authenticator request. So it's not that intrusive to the staff. The other thing that we get frequently is that staff say, oh, well, I'm not willing to take a text message on my personal mobile phone. The answer is fine. So you say, well, if you use Outlook only, that's fine. You don't need to have the second factor authentication because we'll turn off access to everything else other than Outlook and use an app password. If they say we need it, then you can say, well, the only other way around it is to ring a direct dial in the office, so it rings your telephone number when you get a two-factor authentication request. That's fine. It's a pain for the users. It's not as slick as using the app. And what they'll find is all their co-workers will be using the app and they'll just go, do you know what, I'll take a text message to my mobile phone and it'll be fine. So it's not as, and the actual setup process, once it's done, it's relatively straightforward. We generally do it by exception. So we'll send out a list of instructions to staff. They will sign themselves up. And if they struggle, we'll either have somebody on site, or if it's a larger install, or just call the help desk and they'll talk them through it. But it's a relatively straightforward self-service thing to set up.
Yeah, completely agree, Richard. It is, you would call it a no-brainer these days, to be honest. So if you don't have two-factor authentication already set up, please just ask the help desk if you're a customer, or we can help you through if you're not. Because it costs nothing, it doesn't really impact day-to-day life, and it will stop a huge percentage of the problem.
Okay. So that kind of goes around to passwords and home workers' PCs. It's a little bit more challenging when your PCs are at home to manage passwords and get them changed frequently. Obviously, in the office, it makes sense that passwords are strong, they're changed on a schedule, and it's easy. When you log in the morning, your password will say it's going to expire in 3 to 1 days. You change your password before then and move on. When your machine is at home, it's a little bit more challenging, especially if it's not connected to the corporate network via VPN. If it's connected via VPN, the user will get his normal countdown, and as long as the user changes the password prior to expiry, it'll be fine. The challenge comes when if it's connected via VPN and the user ignores any password change requests and then gets to the stage where the password's expired. Generally, the VPN isn't dialed prior to login, so they'll try and log into the machine. They will then try and dial the VPN. The machine will log in because it doesn't know that the password's expired, or it might do, depending on the settings. But then once their VPN connects, it won't actually allow them to connect the VPN, and they'll have to ring the help desk. So it's quite important to tell users when working from home that they need to take heed of the password expiry notices and change the passwords in good time. Do it a couple of days before, so that if they have any issues, it works. The other challenge is if the people aren't using VPN, but they're maybe just using some Office 365 type of stuff from home, that password expiry will be difficult, and they may end up calling the help desk. So in some situations, we've extended password expiry slightly for people using from home, and also just sent some instructions out and made people aware that password expiry is going to be a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, it's a good point, that, Richard. I think contact the help desk if you get any users who can't log in when they're at home, and we can help them through that. And
then another question came with what the best security features in Office 365. There are loads and loads of things it does. Obviously, 2FA we've already discussed, and that's a key thing to implement. One or two other nice things that they've got a security center that you log into, so it can show you all your kind of settings and how to improve the security through Office 365. So we can help with that as part of the help desk. But one interesting one, which a lot of people don't use, is data loss prevention. So your data is obviously key to your business, and it's sat often in Excel and Word and PowerPoint data that's stored in SharePoint, or indeed in some other third-party thing like Dropbox. If we take some data that's in Excel, for example, and sat in SharePoint, what we can do is we can say if it's in a certain location within SharePoint, certain DLP policies apply. These can say things like, well, if that file is emailed out of the business, it's only able to, or not able to be emailed. So if somebody tries to email it, it won't actually let them. If it is emailed, then if it's opened, then it has to be opened on a machine that's logged in with a specific 365 account. So for example, if I send an email with a spreadsheet to a customer, as long as they're logged into their specific 365 account, it'll let them open it. If they send it on to somebody else, it won't let them. You can also do some clever things where that particular document, maybe it'll be allowed to send to a customer, but if they open it, if they try and print that document, they can't print it. If they try and save it as something else, they can't save it as something else. We've done quite a bit of work with an insurance company around this to secure their data, and it's really interesting. It's kind of a next stage of data loss prevention, but it's really worth looking at.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of features within SharePoint for where you store your data, which are useful to look at. 365 also has a load more features that people touch and don't touch on. I think actually our MD is listening to this, and he kindly turned on a feature which stopped us copying and pasting data out of your the Outlook app on your phone, so you couldn't move it from anything else, and it actually is a really good feature to prevent data loss. Sometimes some of these can be frustrating, but that's always the balance and finding out what you think is best for your business. I would we both heavily recommend that if you're worried about data sensitivity within Office 365, give us a shout, because there is a lot more that can be done just over and above changing the rights on files, as Richard has covered brilliantly. So the next question we had was, should I still be concerned if we're working from home on a RDS, which is a remote desktop server or terminal server in old money? That's the icon that usually people connect to through that. There's a couple of questions around this, to be honest. One thing Richard's already talked about is saving passwords. So when you've got an RDS icon on your desktop, whether that be a work machine or a home machine, you have the ability to save the password on it. We would recommend you don't, because if that device gets lost, they'll have the password to connect to your remote server already. Most of the remote desktops that we've set up or we manage have got something called RD Gateway on, which basically protects the data between the icon and the server. And a lot will have a VPN connection as well. It's a secure solution as long as you've got a strong password. So a lot of what we talk about working in the office and from home, these are multifaceted kind of solutions to protect you. So having a strong password, having two-factor, having a server which is protected by security, by SSL certs and things like that, all come together to make one overarching cybersecurity solution for your business. Using remote desktop from home is a very secure method, because ultimately nothing is saved to the desktop. So again, one of the questions which Richard touched on was, or we're going to touch on about saving files. Remote desktop stops that. So if you lose the device, they have to have the password to basically connect to your remote server to get onto it. So it's more secure inherently than using a VPN or something like that, which can connect straight away and save local data to it. So it's something we would recommend over other solutions. However, RDS servers are used to access usually ERP solutions or in-house solutions. Combining what Richard said in the previous question on SharePoint as well for your files and folders can add more security to it. So anyone who's working from home at the moment, what we would recommend is if they're using a personal device or a work device, don't save the password in the icon. And if it's a personal device as well, I've had many conversations actually over the last 3 weeks with people who are using laptops which their kid used to use for doing their college work or GCSE work on. sometimes making sure that people are aware of what icons they click and can't click is a good start as well, and making sure people aren't going into your work information from personal devices as well. But ultimately, don't be too concerned about that one. It's a very good secure solution. The next question we got was, what can you do to prevent cyber intrusion from home workers who are using their own PC to VPN into their work PC? So actually, we thought about this when this started because it's something that we are very worried about, actually. Ultimately, we made a business decision to advise all our customers that that was something that you shouldn't do. A home PC should never connect via VPN to a work network. And we basically try to put that in place across the board where humanly possible. And I think, Richard, would it be fair to say, I think we've done that across 99.9% of the businesses we look after.
Correct, yeah.
The reason why this is an issue is what a VPN fundamentally does is extend the work network around your PC. Now, your PC, a work PC, will have managed antivirus on it. It'll have security policies on it, so people maybe can't install software. It's been used in a work environment for since its inception, so you know it's not had random software installed like people do at home. And ultimately, a home PC has all those things that can't be managed, and that really leads to issues. So what we've done for our customers is when they've not got another option, so they don't have any of the following options, which I'll just skip to the next slide. So if you've not got a suitable firewall, you've not got the RD gateway, which is a way to get into remote desktop, you don't have certificates, or you don't have a remote desktop solution fundamentally, and you can't take a work device home, what we've been doing is we've the firewalls that we supply traditionally have the ability to lock down a connection to somebody's home IP address, so their Sky or their Virgin or something like that. And we've set up an RDS or remote desktop connect icon from that personal PC into the network to their PC in the network, but locked it down so that it can only be accessed from that house. Now that has some challenges because fundamentally home networks change their IP on a regular basis, and we're still using a home device to connect in. But we felt this was the path best suited that will get the user working on their device and in the network which they're used to and is familiar with. And ultimately, if somebody tried to access that device from another IP address or another network, the firewall is good enough to stop that happening. And then you keep the advantages of using the remote desktop icon from the previous slide to access your information. So no spreadsheets, no files, no information is passed back to the home PC. It's just the picture, and that means that that's nice and secure. And I have seen advice like it is on LinkedIn dotted around, which is against this a little bit, but we felt as a business this was the more secure way of doing it. There'll be an overhead from our perspective in managing that every time there's an IP change, but ultimately it's quite secure, and the firewalls that are in situ with a lot of our customers allow that to happen without breaching basically what that fundamentally does is stop any kind of virus or any kind of installed software on the home personal PC infecting the work network. So we've taken the path where setting that up on the firewall is better than allowing the home PC in via VPN. So I must stress, if you've got anybody who does that currently and you're aware, have a personal PC that accesses the network via VPN, please would you let the help desk know, because it's something we can get away from quite quickly and it won't impact the user day to day on a huge scale. So again, it's something we recommend.
This is an interesting question. How do you know if your PC is already infected? Quite frankly, if it's a home PC, you don't. So we as Seriun have no way of knowing anything about a home PC, and that kind of links back to the previous thing that Mark was saying, that this is why we don't want to have home machines connecting to work networks. If it's a corporate managed PC that we have access to and have our agent on, then we do know. So if a machine becomes infected with a virus, the managed antivirus we have on the machine will automatically, well, it'll try and fix it, but it will also automatically raise a ticket on the help desk for somebody to do something proactively about if it can't fix it. We also get reporting around that as well. And this is why we are very keen not to have any non-corporate devices connected to the corporate network. This is why when you go into businesses, they have a guest network, which is completely separate from the corporate network. One of the reasons, anyway, so that if a guest brings a laptop or even mobile phone device into the network, they are completely separated from the corporate network, unable to access any corporate resources, and just get internet access.
Yeah, we've just had a question. Sorry to interrupt, Richard. The question's come back in about connecting a home PC to an RDS or a remote desktop server. That is safe, fundamentally, because the only thing that's sent back for a remote desktop server is the picture. So the data isn't moved back to it, and it is just an icon on the desktop. But we should reiterate, on that home PC, never click the button which says save your password to the remote desktop server, because if somebody else is using that device, they can click the icon and they'll get into your session on the remote desktop server. But ultimately, that is a safe method of getting to your work resources. And ironically, the companies who transitioned into home working the quickest, with the least amount of hardware spend, were the ones who did use home PCs to connect to remote desktop servers.
So VPN, for the people that don't know, it's a virtual private network. So it makes a connection across the internet to another network, wherever it may be, and secures that traffic as it goes across the public internet. There's two types of VPN. A personal VPN, some people may have this. It's designed so that when you're just browsing the internet from your home PC, that traffic is not visible to the internet service provider that you have at home. Generally, people use these to either access sites that maybe their ISP doesn't let them access. So, for example, it's a good example. If you take your mobile phone or PC to France and try and access BBC iPlayer, it won't let you. However, if you connect a VPN that makes yourself appear as if you're coming out of a server, an IP address in the UK, then you can then access iPlayer. So that type of thing is where people use a personal VPN. A work VPN is really to access corporate resources. So it extends the corporate network out to wherever that person happens to be. It secures the traffic so that the traffic isn't accessible to anybody on the internet, so it's encapsulated with a security protocol, but it enables people to access corporate resources when not on the network, physically plugged in or wireless. Another couple of questions people asked was about home routers and home broadband and home networks. Generally out of the box, home routers provided by Sky, Virgin, don't have particularly good security. So there are a number of things that you can do to try and help improve things. Firstly, change the default password. So some routers, if it's a third-party one, may just come with admin and admin. That obviously needs to be changed. Some home routers will come with a little sticker on the back of them. Again, it's always worth changing that from whatever the default is. UPnP is worth disabling. UPnP allows devices behind the home router to open up ports to allow connections from the outside. You would not really generally want to do that. Some gaming, so Xboxes, things like that, require it. But if it's just PCs behind it, then I would switch that facility off. Enable the firewall, general enable by default, but it's worth making sure. Disable DMZ mode. So DMZ mode provides full access to whatever device is in that mode from the outside. So you would never want to turn that on. Also, routers over time, people notice that the vulnerabilities are found in home routers. Routers have software on them. So the manufacturers every so often release a firmware update for that device. It's worth making sure that your home router is on the latest and greatest firmware. Some of the ISPs do this automatically, so Virgin automatically updates their routers. Some don't, especially if you purchased a different router, maybe you've bought a Netgear one, something like that. It's always worth getting that on the latest and greatest. You should also change the wireless key. So most routers will come out of the box with if it's a Netgear one, it'll be just Netgear and there'll be no password, or it'll be something very simple. It's always worth changing that to something that's, especially also that's not pertinent to your house. So don't put, I live at 20 The Drive, so don't put that as the name of the wireless network. Just put home or call it something else. Also disable the older technologies. So WPA2 is the kind of wireless key that we should be using. The older ones, WPA1, it's insecure, so disable that as an option. Finally, disabling WPS. Some routers have the facility that if you want to connect a new device, you press a button on the back of the router and it just connects the device and you don't have to put a key in. That's obviously a risk if somebody's got physical access to the network or physical access to the device, so just disable it.
We are conscious that you've sent all your staff home and they're all now using their home devices, and some are technical people, some are non-technical people, and some of these points are quite technical in terms of changing settings on your router. It will come down to risk against whether you should do it, but checking the firmware up to date, checking you've got strong passwords and default passwords is always worth it. Virgin, Sky, those kind of providers do a lot of these things by default. They're all different. It's we would really hone in on the ones who've changed their home routers or had a little tinker with it, just to make sure that they're okay. But those are by far the best practices. We had a question of should you save your work to your desktop? Really quick answer to this: no. I know it sounds quite blasé, but when the device or you were working within the business, you wouldn't do that anyway, or you should never do it really. So the same answer follows through. I know it's difficult, even more so when you're away and you're on either a slow connection or you're on a VPN. But we would recommend you don't do it, even more so if you're on a home device, because chances are you'll leave that file on that device for future, and then the company has lost track of that, and who knows what it is. And we still have to be mindful of GDPR rules and where PII information is served. So bear that in mind. So I would advise you to advise your staff to not save any work to their desktop if they can avoid it. If they have to, because they've got a slow connection or what they're working on can't be done remotely, then save the file to somewhere on the device, use it, work on it, then push it back to the network, and then remember to delete it off the device afterwards and empty it from the recycle bin as well. But we would really just try and say to people that don't do it. And if you can get your staff into a mentality of not doing it from the outset, then that'll follow through completely to not doing it in the future as well when they're back in the office. Ultimately, if you save something to your local device and that device dies, there's a very, very good chance that you don't have a backup of it. So you will lose that information. One caveat to that is if you're an Office 365 user and you have access to OneDrive, which is a personal repository for files, you can put a folder on your system by going into the portal, and those files are synced back up to OneDrive and can protect it. But I would heavily recommend that is only done on work devices and not personal devices, because the management, again, is an issue.
ShareFile is a third-party product from Citrix. It's used quite frequently by solicitors, accountants, that type of thing, but can be used by any business. And it's for exchanging files securely with third parties. So it's a great tool, useful for especially for ensuring secure access, and also ensuring access is monitored to a file. So you can upload a file, allow certain people access for a certain amount of time, have that file automatically delete from ShareFile after a certain period of time. You can see whether a user's opened the file. It's just another way of sharing files essentially, but it's good when sharing with third parties. If anybody wants to have a look at it, we'll stick the link up in the chat, and if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, just give us a call.
Yeah. The next question we got was, we're doing a lot around Microsoft Teams, and we've got a webinar next Thursday, I think at 9:30, which we'll send out and send some marketing stuff out about after this. Microsoft Teams is usually included in every subscription that Microsoft have, bar the email only one. It's really proven to be a great solution over the last few weeks for people who didn't use it. We're doing this via Microsoft Teams now on what they call a live event, but ultimately it's keeping people connected in their homes into work information. So we'll do a full hour on it next week in terms of tips and tricks and Q&A on it. But a question that came through was, how do you prevent your whole team from setting up too many channels? Just as a background for people who aren't aware of it, Teams, you basically make a team for certain areas of business, but ultimately you get one for the entire business when you start it by default. And a channel is a list of basically different kind of conversations within that team. So you can have a team for sales and marketing, then you could have a channel for webinar today, new launch in 2 weeks, or product design XYZ. And ultimately, by default, people can make as many of these things as you want. So I've just grabbed a screenshot of how you change it. So this is ours, and I didn't notice when I did this, but we called ourselves the Geek Squad for some reason. We'll leave that and move on quickly. But ultimately, if you go into the team, if you right-click the team and go to Manage Team, you get these options. You go to the Settings tab. You can then change the membership for who is allowed to do what, basically, and basically lock it down so that members can't do it. In a team, you have two, there's a few permission levels, but the two main ones are manager, owner and member. An owner will automatically get the option to make as many channels and do what they wish, but you can restrict that down to 1 or 2 people in your organization. But a member has a lot of things that they can do by default. So you can choose the settings option here to basically restrict their access down and lock it down. Now, why this matters from working from home is ultimately we are seeing people lose a little bit of control and a little bit of admin over some of their solutions. It's worth locking it down before people go crazy, basically, and make channels for everything they're going to do, from going out, well, not going out, having a drink on Friday night, or actually work-related activities as well. So this is the last question, actually, that we had of general advice from working from home and what to look for, which Rich is going to take. But hopefully we've answered quite a lot of those points as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, really. I think to mitigate the risk of using a home network, it comes down to making sure the router is secure, the device that you're connecting with, and the wireless access points within the home. And general advice, one interesting thing is just lock your PC. So after you walk away from your PC, in the office, clearly lock it. But at home, people may think it's not as much of an issue because it's in their house. But you know, you've got kids in the house, that kind of thing. They'll come up and they'll use the PC. Just lock it. Then nobody can use it. And just be aware, I think, is the other thing. So you know, there are more people trying to execute scams because people are working from home, people using applications they've not used before, people using third-party things, Zoom, you know, these other applications that really aren't part of the corporate set of applications. And it's just being aware for their staff and making sure they just observe best practice.
Yeah, just to follow on for that, which is I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it's a non-technical thing, but also home working. It's worthy of note that health and safety still plays a part in terms of DSE checks and equipment and things like that. People hunching over a laptop all day is not good for their back, how their seating is. You know, those things which we take for granted in the office are no longer out there. We've asked all our staff, for example, is the chair good enough at home? Do we need to go back to the office to go and get chairs, or do we need to get chairs? Has everyone got suitable size monitors to keep their productivity up? So while everything we've talked about is about cybersecurity, working from home, also it's worth noting that health and safety still applies as well outside the office. So having, for example, we've sent a questionnaire out to all our staff saying, what do you need? Is there anything you're worried about in terms of your setup? Do we need to get more monitors, etc.? And that has meant that they've been productive as fast as possible, but also we are taking into consideration their health and safety as well. What I could also flag the importance of is the accreditations that are out there, not in a sales manner at all. These are accreditations that we hold, But if you as an organisation hold any of these cyber accreditations or data security accreditations, it's worth reminding your staff that these things still apply. They're still relevant, even though they're outside the office. You know, ultimately, however they access their data via a home PC or a work PC or anything that is around that kind of discussion, the policies and frameworks that you put in place as part of these accreditations or may decide to put in place as you go through these accreditations actually pay dividends even more now because it matters. So, for example, companies with cyber essentials, unless there's a genuine reason, they won't have admin rights on their devices, which means that users won't be tempted to install applications just so they can go to online meetings, for example, that might not be suitable. Zoom is an absolute brilliant application, very useful for online meetings, but it's been shown over the last few weeks to have some challenges in the cyber world. Not saying anything against that, but if you take that as an example, that other applications can be installed on desktops without the management or IT administrators knowing about those. These frameworks that you should have in place stop those by default. So reminding your staff that they're there and actually using those to lock down the machines is a good thing as well. So we would heavily recommend that if you we're either considering one of these frameworks, it's worth looking at. But if you already have one, remind your staff that they are still pertinent in this situation, if not more than they were before. We've answered some questions which were on the chat, and hopefully we've answered all the questions which were submitted to the session. There's no further questions actually in the chat to go through at this point. So
there was one, Mark. Just
sorry, apologies.
Somebody mentioned that. So there's a new feature that the banks are bringing out. At the moment, when you send money, you just put the sort code and account number, and you get nothing. So you don't know the name on the account. You don't know that. You might sometimes get the other banks, so whether it's Royal Bank of Scotland, HSBC, but you don't get very much information. Over the next month, the banks are bringing out a feature that when you put the sort code and account number in to make a new transfer, you will get the name of the third party who you're going to transfer it to. So it hopefully improves security, so that if you put the sort code and password in, put sort code and account number, and you get somebody you don't know's name appearing, you will think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, and that follows on when we talk to people about security in general, whether it be working from home or in the business. It's the people who have the ability to transfer money who should be trained the most, locked down the most, and protected the most as well. So have a think about those in your business and where they're working from now. If they, because people have moved from home, and we've seen it in our business, I'm not going to lie, not the transfer of money, thankfully, but people start to forget the procedures and policies that you had in situ beforehand that were rigorous inside, because somebody would be peer-to-peer checking them, or just sat next to them saying, this sounds a bit weird, can we just check it? And that doesn't happen when you sat at home as easily. So actually reminding your staff that to follow the policies and procedures you have in place, and if you haven't, putting them in place as fast as possible, because they are the ones which will matter for these kind of things, is a massively good thing, and we couldn't recommend that as well more as well. Okay, that's all the questions. We thank you for coming as well. Hopefully it's been valuable to you. We've got 2 more of these sessions booked in, one next week on Microsoft Teams, a Q&A, very much in a similar format to this. But again, if you please suggest changes if you feel they will give you more value. And then we're going to do one on SharePoint as well the week after, which will send information out. We'll follow this up with an email with a recording of the event that you can send round to your staff if you wish and have a look at. But if we've not answered any of your questions at all, please drop us an email to either me or Richard, and we'll come back to you and hopefully we answer them. So thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.